Welcome to CNN Talk, where we're talking about Huawei because, Samuel, President Trump has declared a national emergency over Huawei. What does that actually mean?
Well, I think it's more about using the executive powers. When you do something like that, you can do something unilaterally. And Trump has been going on about Huawei for a long time, and so now he's actually putting more action behind what he's been talking about.
He's blacklisted Huawei.
Essentially, what it means is that major telecoms companies in the U.S. cannot use their equipment, and anybody wanting to bring in their equipment has to get permission from the U.S. government. It's effectively a block or a major hurdle that Huawei probably won't be able to overcome, at least while Trump is in office.
He's addressing an issue which is a big issue in many countries, not least here as well, but we haven't blacklisted Huawei.
Look, it would be really, really unusual for us to make a decision like that, and I think probably without precedent in the kind of post iPhone stroke, phone age. So I don't think the fact that we haven't done it means that it's the wrong thing to do, but I nevertheless think that it's more about posturing than the actual issue at hand.
What do you think of the move?
I fully support it. I think that the argument in this country is all about should Huawei be involved in the rollout of 5G. Now, I am no technical expert, but even I can see that if you have a company from essentially a foreign power that has a record of cyber attacks against this country, you have a record of spying on huge companies in this country, I wouldn't let them anywhere near it.
But you can say that about almost any country.
How do you mean?
What do you mean? What country doesn't do spying and doesn't do cyber attacks?
But we've never been cyber attacked by the French.
I'm sorry. If you look at the figures, you look at all of the cyber attacks that come against this country, a huge number of them come from China. Are you suggesting that we do cyber attacks on China? I don't think so.
You don't think that there's any type of
you
don't think there's any type of cyber espionage
I think
that
there
goes
is
on
espionage
from the
that
UK?
goes on with all countries that do espionage, but what they are actually there is a deliberate government policy of attacking this country's infrastructure, of attacking this country's big companies. We don't do that in reverse.
Well, and let's not forget too, this isn't a new thing. The British government here did put in a policy to actually have Huawei's technology tested here by British technology experts before it could be released into a wider network, looking for these backdoors. So it's not like anybody's been caught unaware. So to your point, is blind to the threat that this company has posed. We're all trying to figure out how to deal with this company in a way that benefits consumers but doesn't compromise national security or state secrets or intellectual property.
If there is any doubt that it compromises national security, they should not be allowed to take part in the 5G rollout.
But there's doubt about all of those companies. I could go through Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia, all top companies. But there's always doubt about those.
But I don't think the Finns are coming after us.
You keep equating China with our allies, which is utterly preposterous.
No, I'm definitely not equating. I just know.
You are.
But
You just did.
I just know from reporting on cybersecurity that one of the biggest groups behind cyber espionage is the United States. I'm not equating.
Which is an ally of ours.
No, but hang on a second. Let's kind of take a step back. Currently,
we were both enjoying it.
Quite good.
you are talking about corporations rather than governments right at the moment. So you could argue separately how closely connected Nokia was to a government or Huawei was to a government. But you can't really say Trump is an ally and Huawei is an enemy.
I can.
And I don't actually.
I think a lot of people will say it though.
Well, they can do, but Trump is no ally of mine. I don't see Trump's America as a major strategic ally of the UK's,
really?
and I think most
That's
people
the difference
don't.
between us, then,
well,
isn't it?
It's one difference
America
between us.
has been an ally, our main ally for the last century, and continues to be, despite the aberration of Donald Trump.
Ian, it's really not about the election of Donald Trump or anything else. It's
you just made it about it.
Well, look, you just have to be a little bit sensible. America is currently...
OK, I'll try my best. I'll try my best.
America is currently in the hands of an autocratic...
Currently, for the next 18
but if
months,
he were
maybe.
to try to direct a private company in the United States to say, do this on my behalf, that company would tell him to get stuffed. If the Chinese ask Huawei to do something, they do it.
The FBI came to the U.S. in the San Bernardino terror attack, said we want access to the phone. And Apple said, no, thank you.
Sure,
and then the
well,
Israelis unlocked
maybe
it anyway,
Apple
so.
says no, but
And
I'm not...
would Huawei say no to the Chinese government? I don't think so.
They say yes. They are by
It's
law
like about
required.
doing a TV show, which is about to start.
Look.
They are required by law
Stand by.
to assist.
Exactly.
Welcome to CNNTalk. Donald Trump has declared a national emergency over the company, the Chinese company, Huawei. Is he right to do that?
U.S. President Donald Trump firing another shot in his trade war against China. This time, it's against the Chinese telecom giant Huawei.
He signed an executive order barring U.S. companies from buying telecom gear from companies that pose a national security threat.
The fear, of course, in the United States is that the Chinese Communist Party could compel Huawei to use its equipment to spy.
I'd rather shut down the company. In our 30-year history, we have never received such requests.
The order doesn't name Huawei specifically, but a short time later, the Commerce Department added Huawei to a list of companies Washington considers to be undermining U.S. interests.
Was the U.S. very keen to persuade allies to do likewise?
So far, it feels like most Western allies have been rather skeptical of the U.S. argument.
We made it clear to the whole world last year that we would sign no spying agreements and would not install backdoors.
Do have your say on our Facebook feed. Is Donald Trump right to declare a national emergency? Manuela says Trump is always right. James says, of course not. He's abusing his powers as usual. Heidi says, what's the emergency? Every country does it, Ian Dale.
Every country indulges in spying. That is absolutely right. Not every country indulges in cyber attacks. Not every country indulges in trying to deliberately attack a country's infrastructure or indeed big companies within that country.
Sorry, but what country doesn't engage in cyber attacks? I'm from the United States. The U.S. certainly does it. You've seen all the investigations that's been done into the Iran nuclear power plant. And certainly most researchers believe that the United States or Israel did that via cyber means.
I have seen evidence of who attacks this country, which countries. And it is primarily China, Russia and North Korea. And the volume of these attacks is, you have to see it to believe it.
But you don't believe that the US and the UK carry out cyber attacks, though?
I certainly believe the US does. I don't know about the UK. It may do.
But you've got a duty of care to find out, right? If your point is going to be this company is evil.
China is effectively an enemy of this country in this regard. We don't have the United States doing cyber attacks on us. We don't have Germany doing cyber attacks.
Says it's an independent company.
Well, of course it's not an independent company. You have to be a simpleton to think that there is no link between Huawei and the Chinese government, for goodness sake.
I will say, when I talk to experts in this field doing my reporting, whenever I ask them, do you think if the Chinese government comes to a Chinese company and says, we want this, do you think that the Chinese companies will say no to them? And I've yet to find an impartial researcher that will say, yes, we think they'll turn them down.
Well,
that's the key point
Until
here.
in 2017, she changed the law to make it a requirement to comply on national security grounds and intelligence gathering. So that is the difference there between a Western country where surely some cyber attacks do happen or espionage happens. But we have to remember, too, that China has built a lot of its technology on stolen intellectual property from the West. There's another element of who's doing what to...
You say that, but, and I think that is true it was true largely about China at a certain point, but now if you look at the technology, I report every day on iPhone versus the Huawei phone. The Huawei phones are so far ahead of the iPhone, for example. A lot of these companies, if we're going to be fair here, have moved ahead of the U.S. innovation.
And it's amazing what Chinese
statements.
Yeah, let's do it.
Restricting Huawei from doing business in the US will not make the US more secure or stronger. Instead, this will only serve to limit the US to inferior, yet more expensive alternatives.
Well, to Samuel's point, I mean, if they have outpaced Apple, which generally is accepted they have, then, of course, it will...
So that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, of course it's accurate.
An accurate statement.
But, if Ian's right, that they're an implacable enemy of the state and they do things that no other state does, I think there is enmity there, but I don't think they do things that no other state does, then it's worth the consumer cost.
The wider picture here is that this country in particular has tried to cozy up to China over the last decade, particularly under David Cameron and George Osborne's government. And they've encouraged China to invest in our nuclear infrastructure, in our water industries, all sorts of different aspects of our infrastructure. I've always thought this was a really unwise thing to do, all just to get Chinese money. Now, Theresa May, when she became Prime Minister, rolled back on that a bit. And she made clear right from the start she was very suspicious of this. And she instituted a review about the Hinkley Point nuclear power station. But in the end, that's still going ahead.
Well, it didn't make any difference, did it? And this is what I think, is there's a lot of warm words, but there's no actual difference in policy. It is a problem that China invests in UK infrastructure. It's not a problem because I think they're all evil. It's a problem because government should be investing in its own infrastructure in order to make...
It is partly because of evil, if you want to put it that way.
It's really not. Look, I have as much problem
as... If they could switch the lights out in this country in a time of conflict, we shouldn't be giving the ability to do so.
You were involved in
wait a second,
sort of Canadian government...
That's all you do.
...decision to blacklist, effectively, Huawei. So what was the debate there? So Canada was quite ahead on this.
Yeah, so this is a few years ago now, but yeah, we had to take the decision, could they bid on government work? And obviously Canada is part of the Five Eyes alliance with the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And that was absolutely a discussion 5 years ago. We cannot let these people into our core networks because, and especially now, with the way the world is going, 5G, what that does, the Internet of Things, connecting every device in every household to the Internet, you are effectively giving corporations, whether it's Huawei or Apple or Amazon, access into all the information about what you do and how you do it. So there's a different question between should the Chinese come here and invest money in physical infrastructure like building an airport or roads versus powering the skeleton network that shares information, which is what the future is going to be about. That's a big question for a government to get.
I just think it's worth noting journalistically, whenever I talk to government sources, do they have any proof? Is there any proof that Huawei has done this, that they can actually carry this out? And they always say, no, we don't have any evidence that they've done this, which doesn't mean that they couldn't, but this is all potential. I think if you're someone like Ian, you're very worried about the potential, but it's just worth noting that, especially because if you look at attacks like the WannaCry attack. I remember being on air with you nonstop, Max, reporting on this, where people's computers were being locked up, and later on there was reporting that said the money that people were paying in ransom was going to North Korea. That was all software that was stolen from the NSA, according to researchers.
There's an AU allegations, because you're right, there hasn't been any sort of firm evidence that they've been hacking, but this is from the AU. African Union officials have accused China of hacking its headquarters, computer systems every night for 5 years and downloading confidential data. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs denied the hacking allegations. They didn't name Huawei, but the assumption is...
Given the Chinese investment in Africa, which is massive, I mean, Africa is now a giant colony of China to a large extent.
That's not true.
Can I finish?
Well,
there is...
Say silly things.
OK, go on.
Well, look, I mean... This overstatement is just silly. China is a huge investment in Australia's fracking industry. It's a huge investor in Africa's... Well, 1 minute we're saying, you know, the Five Eyes are completely protected against this and Africa has been taken over as a colony, which I think actually does diminish the role of colonialisation in Africa's predicament as well. Well, I wouldn't call it a colony of China. I think that misunderstands what a colony is and it misunderstands what the policy is.
I completely understand what a colony is.
Well, not by the way you're talking, but anyway, the point is that, like, you know, China is a huge investor in our nuclear infrastructure, which I do not think is a tiny thing.
So why would the African Union make those allegations if they weren't true?
I'm not saying they're not true. I'm just saying
they've got everything to lose.
I'm just saying what you're doing is trying to make this completely false dichotomy between the West and its kind of sensible attitude to China and Africa, which has already been taken over as a colony. And it's nonsense.
I didn't say that at all.
What did you say?
I said that because of the huge investment by China in Africa, the African Union is hardly likely to make this statement if there wasn't some truth to it, because that could jeopardise further investment from China.
But that isn't what you said. You said they've been taken over as a colony.
The one thing I really want to make a point of, because I think maybe when you've heard me, Ian, you think I'm trying to equate China to the U.S., which I mean, my real point in all of this is that we should be suspicious of all of these companies, of all of the technology around us. We should be suspicious of tech that comes from China, the U.S. I've been reporting on air this week, Max, about that WhatsApp. The software is coming via WhatsApp. They can use... allegedly it's an Israeli company called NSO. They deny that their software is being used that way. But software that can come via WhatsApp, though that's now been repaired, that could use the microphone and the camera on your iPhone or your Android device, whether it's Apple or Huawei, to be able to listen and look at you. So I think people are rightfully suspicious of Huawei, but we should maybe be rightfully suspicious of more folks.
I'm suspicious of all technology. I mean, you look at what you look at what Facebook can do. I went the other day to an address in London, and then the next day I get a Facebook friend recommendation from the person that lives at that address. Not them doing it; it's Facebook recommending it. How did they do that?
And how do we know that Anna Stewart's in Paris? Because she's actually on camera right now.
Suspicious.
She was at a technology conference. Take us through the conference and the fact that I know that you got someone from Huawei appearing, and they're really sort of stealing the headline act today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a huge talking point, and actually it really reaches far beyond Huawei. It affects actually quite a few different tech companies, particularly here. On the one hand, you have the US president's executive order that effectively bans US firms from obtaining technology from Huawei. That will impact many US carriers, particularly the smaller ones, as well as impacting Huawei. And then you've got the Commerce Department adding Huawei to the so-called entity list. Now, that effectively means it'll be very hard for Huawei to obtain components, technology from US firms. And they are really reliant on some like Intel, like Qualcomm. So again, damaging Huawei, but also damaging US companies. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's very damaging for the consumer. Now, as you said, Huawei is appearing at VivaTech. On the stage behind me, you'll see Jack Ma. We will be hearing from Ken, who's the deputy chairman of Huawei later today. Now, he wants to talk about Huawei's work in helping startups in France, helping startups in Europe, where they are trying to make a really big presence. But of course, this is really overshadowing events. And actually, this morning, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, he arrived at the conference, and all the journalists were swarming him and asking him, will France follow next? What will Europe do? Will they ban Huawei next? And the answer was, you know, it's very important to consider national security and technology, but an outright ban on a company, according to Macron, is not the right way to go about it. Max?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Different countries coming up with different solutions here, and perhaps the United States has been too extreme on its move.
Well, I think they're the ones that get to set the parameter of the discussion, if you will. You know, if they jump, the other countries like Canada, countries that share intelligence with them have to pay heed to that. And Mike Pompeo came over here and in no uncertain terms told the British government what the expectation was on their involvement in it, because on the national security front, there are 5 countries that share everything.
But what will Canada likely do as a result of this?
Well, Canada has an extra dimension because after we acted on the extradition of the CFO of Huawei, they arrested 2 Canadian citizens and have trumped up drug charges on a couple of more and have now escalated that today. So there is a straight line between things happening. This is a straight line between things happening to Huawei and things happening to people on behalf of the Chinese government in China.
Well,
that's the difference here.
I'll play both sides of this coin because it's very complicated because President Trump has mixed the trade war with the situation with the CFO, the daughter of the founder of Huawei.
I do agree with.
So you agree?
I do agree with you on that.
That it's been mixed up.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could say that this is part of the trade war. On the other hand, you could also say that there is no American company that's going to fill Huawei's place. There's no economic interest for the United States to do this because there's no 5G leaders. So it may not be for economic reasons, maybe because they're genuinely fearful of Huawei.
So we're talking here about the Five Eyes. We should explain that these are the sort of 5 countries that share intelligence. And if the United States is saying we can't have anything to do with Huawei, it does pressure all those other countries to take the same
Especially
Australia and New Zealand already are.
I mean,
especially the UK that wants a trade deal so desperately with the United States. When you talked about cozying up, certainly Theresa May has had to cozy up to Donald Trump.
But look, we need a trade deal with everybody, right? Because of the dreadful catastrophe that is Brexit. So whether or not we can, you know, we might want a trade deal with America, but we also want one with China, and everybody knows that.
Yeah. What country wouldn't?
Yeah, but can we just remember about the Five Eyes? It used to be called the White Commonwealth, and it still very much takes that approach. You know, put white countries first, everybody else later.
Japan is doing this as well.
Yeah, but
I know, but they're not in Five Eyes, are they? I mean, that's what... When we have these conversations and say, look, the Five Eyes alliance is very, very important. It's got racist roots. Yeah,
Julian on Facebook says Snowden showed us long ago that the US does this all the time.
And then there's just a conflation between espionage, which all countries do, and state-directed commercial espionage, either stealing secrets, or if the Chinese government were to decide one day to activate any backdoors that have not been activated to date, could they do it? Could they make that request and have it executed?
And I have to
yes or no?
I have to say, to your point, I cover so many technology companies, and so often off camera, the CEOs will tell me, I'm afraid to say anything, or I don't want to cause problems, I don't want to mess with our Chinese consumers, but we are just hacked incessantly. They feel that so much of their commercial product is stolen from China. You hear it from about China more than any other country in the world. That is for sure.
If you do a trade deal with China, in our experience in government, they get what they want. You never get what you want. They want to sell to you.
Is it just how it looks?
No, it is. You know, Canadian companies, for example, have been trying to get into Chinese markets, whether that's banks, agricultural, etc. It never happens.
Can we imagine BT, British Telecom, being allowed by the Chinese government to do in China what Huawei are doing here?
Well,
no, we can't.
They won't even allow Facebook, Twitter, or Google, and you can't even do a search.
So why
there.
are we even
those products are
why
banned.
are we even thinking of allowing them in if they wouldn't do it in a reciprocal way?
This is the normal consequence of free trade fundamentalism.
Iqbal on our Facebook says it's very simple. Some people cannot accept the truth that the Chinese are good at making stuff, including 5G.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
We're going to break. We're going to be back. And Sandra's going to speak. It's going to be amazing.
I'm sorry,
There are so many UK companies that will have to pay so much more for 5G technology and for inferior 5G technology that it's actually UK business that's fighting to keep Huawei
That's an
here.
interesting point. Completely agree, yeah.
But I mean,
that's where it's gotten to. We are now at that point. You know, could this have been done earlier?
I just say, let's call the whole thing off.
yeah, but what's your are you okay with the UK falling behind technologically?
Well,
I'm on 3G signal half the time in London. I think we've already fallen behind.
Exactly. We've already fallen behind in
But
some
really,
ways.
I mean, I see both sides of it. I don't want to be hacked or eavesdropped by any government.
I'd rather have a bit slower internet, if that's what it takes, than be hacked all the time.
That's a reasonable statement.
But there's a separate question here, too, is that even if you look at Huawei's
one I
code,
made.
as experts have done, is their code's not any better than anybody else's code? It can still be hacked by malicious actors. It's not just this Chinese government that
are
can
you
put
saying
Their equipment is superior and much cheaper.
But I think this is an interesting point. Are we saying, therefore, that Chinese technological innovation is so far ahead of Western innovation that we can't catch up? Is that what we're hearing here?
In tech terms, we always talk, when we talk to investors, they'll tell you how many years ahead. And right now they say that, for instance, Huawei ahead of Apple is like a year to 2 years ahead of Apple. So yes, they can catch up, but it'll take them that much time to do it. Huawei already has a 5G phone, Apple doesn't. Huawei has the foldable phone. So there is a lag.
Is Trump right to declare a national emergency over Huawei? The question we're asking today. Pete on Facebook says Huawei is better than iPhone. Simple as that. Sue says many countries...
That's a fact. Can I just say that? Technologically, it's a fact.
Sue says many countries spy, but so do transnational corporations and individuals. And Olaf says Trump abuses the state of emergency rights. The US should be worried. Let's just bring you an op-ed here that was is from... He's an analyst at the Royal United Services Institute. He says, in relation to the UK, allowing Huawei a role in the UK's 5G would be a massive mistake, both for technological reasons and to avoid putting long-term trust in a company so closely bound up with the Chinese Communist Party. The point being that many countries are dealing with this issue, but Donald Trump has actually gone right out there and blacklisted them.
Well, I mean, I think Donald Trump does everything for attention, right? So you can't really analyse it in the sense of, is this a sensible move with a long-term strategic aim? He does everything for rhetorical effect and for attention. I wouldn't even really dignify.
What if it is sensible?
It might well be sensible in the fullness of time.
You've got to get over your hatred for Donald Trump.
I don't.
Has he done? Well, you clearly do. Has he done the right thing, or has he done the wrong thing?
No. It's not really about. It's not that simple, actually, Ian. The point is that when somebody kind of blusters around saying this is a national emergency, using China as a way to kind of iterate his protectionist policies, using it as a way to kind of create an enemy in order to whip up support among his own base, it's not as simple as, has he done the right thing?
Which is why he never should have mixed up the trade war with Huawei when he said he could, again, just going back to it, that he could maybe see helping the CFO, Huawei founder's daughter, get out of house arrest in Canada as part of the trade war negotiations.
This is why no one will ever give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt in anything, because of what Zoe said. People will always suspect malign intentions.
But because of some of his comments that he made.
Of course,
and because of his actions.
I'm saying that it's his own fault that you come to this conclusion.
I'm saying that you're
because
not.
you would do on everything.
I'm saying that you're not taking seriously the threat he poses to liberal democracy. You're just not taking it seriously.
I completely am, and people,
I don't think you
people who
are.
watch this programme regularly will know that I am not a fan of Donald Trump.
I watch it all the time.
But
Max, you have a lot of viewers.
But in the end, you have to look at it from a national security point of view. And sometimes you have to accept that Donald Trump will have received briefings from his national security people and may have come to the right conclusion. You have to accept that is a possibility.
Certainly people on the left, there are people on the left who are worried about the threat to liberal democracy from China.
I think Obama would have done this.
Quite conceivably, but you're talking about a man for whom his advisors have to put his name in every briefing because he can't keep his mind on a paragraph unless he sees his name in it. We are not. If he's made the right decision, then he's made it by accident.
Sonny sort of is reflecting what you're saying he's always chaotic, creating problems where none exists. But actually,
creating chaos can be a good thing.
This issue with China, you know, a lot of his critics actually say on this, he's actually doing something really positive because there is a problem here, and he's at least highlighted the issue of Chinese interference, potentially.
And I think you would see that in the bipartisan support Trump has on China writ large on the trade front as well. That the gamble was always with the world that if we treat China like the Western world, China will change to look like the Western world in both its business and cultural practices. That has not been the case. And we have now seen that WTO rules don't apply. China doesn't play by any trade rules. And on technology, like I said, in year 2017, they changed the law to make it mandatory for Chinese corporations, whether they're state-owned and controlled or not, to cooperate with the Chinese government. And this is a part of a trend with Xi Jinping changing the rules to set him up to be leader for much longer than 2 5-year terms and to make China more aggressive on the military stage. So this is part of a much broader picture. And I think Donald Trump is absolutely right to start asking these questions, even if he's completely wrong in how he executes it or his motivation or his consistency, as we saw with Qualcomm and ZTE.
Chelsea says, I don't like Trump, but I agree with this decision. Russell says, is Huawei now going to dump Google Android? You can't have it both ways.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing here is the Chinese want their technology in the world, but they don't want the U.S. or the Western technology in their countries. We talked about Facebook, Twitter, Google is banned there. I think at the end of the day, the consumer at home, though, is sitting. Huawei is incredibly popular in terms of the consumer product, and they look and they see that it's cheaper and better, higher quality cameras, foldable phones, for example. And I think the average person's wondering, well, what am I going to do? And I think they'll oftentimes go for what's better and cheaper. But when you start to look at the reports from the New York Times and the reporting our colleague Matt Rivers has done in China, what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims there, and how they're using technology to monitor those, that's where you start really connecting the dots here. And I think in the bigger picture, it raises some very legitimate concerns.
Madeline says, we've all been worried about China. Obama ignored it.
That's not true, though. He tried to do the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement.
You're looking at me like I was Obama's advisor at the time. Yes, I told Obama to do something about this. No. Look, he didn't move. He didn't move as fast as this, but that's because he was a person who was thinking about things.
But the Trans-Pacific Trade Alliance was supposed to be, it wasn't as loud as Donald Trump maybe, but it did become an important issue in the 2016 campaign, was his way of building up other nations through free trade to have a counterbalance to China. That's something very significant.
Stay firm, President Trump, says Brian. Right behind him. Anna's behind him as well. Trump is right. There's lots of support for Donald Trump on this, even from critics.
But this is interesting, though, isn't it? Because he's framed it exactly the opposite way of Obama executing a policy was to bolster the people around that person.
It doesn't mean that he's wrong.
No, it doesn't mean that he's wrong. But it's just a really interesting way. It's just a really interesting difference that there are ways of dealing with China. You can try and start a trade war with a mind to starting a real war down the line, or you can start to kind of strengthen your own allies.
Do you think Donald Trump is trying to start a real military war with China?
I'm not saying that that's actually... he's made the connective thoughts. I'm not saying he's made the connected thought that leads to that, but it's not at all unusual for a real war to start as a trade war.
Well,
I mean, that's how real
Ross
wars
is saying
start.
Trump will demand that NATO countries ban it, linking into the Five Eyes argument, that if you're in Five Eyes, you need to stick with what the US are doing.
No, I think those countries are already a lot on the same page, and there's obviously still discussions with the UK and some way to going.
Do you think?
Well, I think
it's all heading that direction.
I think it would be right to make that ask. and it'll be interesting to see if he does, and what the mood is like at the G20 at the end of next month, where Trump and Xi Jinping will be in the same room.
That's going to be
I
explosive,
mean,
right?
the two men individually have developed a reasonable relationship. I think there is one of a mutual respect. Don't sneer.
Well, no, I'm not sneering. I'm making
you
a
are
face.
sneering.
That
I mean,
wasn't my sneering face.
But nothing, strong, Ian.
But nothing tangible has come out of it
She
yet.
keeps
though.
making me lose my train of thought.
She's very good at
That's
it.
what she is very good
working.
at.
I'm really not
If you look at the meetings that they've had, I think both sides have thought they've been quite successful. And
Successful, but they haven't had any outcome yet.
Well, maybe,
They've
but
increased
well,
tariffs,
that's-
which we, the
but
people,
that's-
are having to
Exactly.
pay.
That's what
but
happens. Trump will meet these, but it's like Kim
The
Jong-un.
reason I was making the face, which wasn't sneering,
Come back,
by the way,
Aisha, all is forgiven.
it wasn't sneering. I wasn't sneering.
We
I
love
was
each other, really.
disbelieving. The reason it doesn't really make any difference what the two men's relationship is like, and the reason I absolutely
course
can't
it makes
stand.
a
Shush a minute. The reason I can't stand this strongman politics nonsense, where two guys in a room, their relationship is really important, is that exactly as you just said, he had this relationship with Kim Jong.
Do you not think it's good for world leaders to build good relationships?
It doesn't
means
actually mean anything.
It means war
It
is
doesn't
less
mean
likely.
anything.
I'll just say
It
for the
doesn't make-
businesses that I reported, again, they tell me so often, many times in private, because they don't want to tick off the Chinese, that they have real concerns. Trade, they can't get into China, even though China can get into the US, UK, Canada. Espionage, for example. They do have these real concerns, but so far, Trump hasn't delivered on those. He's only made life more difficult for them in their operations in China. They're hopeful, though.
We have to leave it there. Charles says this is the only thing this president has said or done that actually makes sense. And Sadiq says Huawei's good for the middle-class people and below. Fair price for all their products. That's your point.
That's accurate. That's an accurate statement.
Thank you for watching. Also, thank you for listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you want to subscribe, then do. Look up CNN Talk on Apple Podcasts. And thank you for watching. And you can continue the debate on Facebook. There's so many platforms now.
We're going to continue.